Thank you. As a person with hearing loss, how do we identify ourselves? Are we a person first who simply then cannot hear well? How does our hearing loss affect us socially, mentally, and psychologically? Our speaker today, Dr. Michael Harvey, will encourage us to tell our stories, to think about who we really are. Will we accept our hearing loss even more by the end of our program today? Quite possibly. Dr. Harvey, a clinical psychologist who published more than 50 articles, and two of his most recent books are Listen with the Heart, Relationships and Hearing Loss, and the other book is Odyssey of Hearing Loss, Tales of Triumph. And in talking with the publisher of these books, he said he is hard of hearing, has a hearing loss, and he said it was a life-changing experience to read Dr. Harvey's second book. Dr. Harvey has given presentations at the National HLAA conventions many times, and this year I was finally able to attend one of his sessions. I was so impressed with his talk that the instant he finished, I immediately hurried up to the front of the room and asked if he would ever be willing to repeat his presentation to our chapter members, to all of you. He kindly said, I'd love to. I hope you enjoy his words of wisdom as much as I did. Ladies and gentlemen, with the marvels of technology, it is indeed an honor to present Dr. Michael Harvey, magically from his office in Framingham, Massachusetts. And Dr. Harvey, where are you?
Can you see me?
There you are.
Okay. Can everybody see me and hear me? And you see my slide? I just need to make sure of that.
Go ahead, start over again, Dr. Harvey.
Okay. Can everybody see me and hear me and see my PowerPoint slide?
Yes.
Okay.
I
then
see the slide, but I don't see you.
Okay. You don't see me. Can other people see me?
Try.
Yeah. Okay, Fred, I don't know what to tell you. We have okay, am I good to go ahead?
Yeah.
Okay. Listen, it's a pleasure being here, particularly since there were no airplane delays this time. And the question comes up, rightfully so, you know, I don't have a hearing loss, so what right do I have to talk about a hard of hearing identity? I have had the honor and pleasure over the last 40 years of hearing a lot of stories, and a lot of stories about one's struggle to find an identity, to make an identity. And basically, I have come to view myself as a storyteller. And one of the things that I love to do is hear stories, make psychological sense of the stories, and then tell stories back. So I think I'd like to begin my talk with a story. What I'll do is I'll babble for maybe 40, 45 minutes, and then we'll have enough time for some discussion of some of your stories. Yeah, I'm hearing some audio feedback. Are we okay with audio?
Yep. How's that?
I'm hearing feedback.
Okay.
Okay. I just turned my speaker down, but we're okay at your end?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that a little better?
Yeah, it's better, much better. Thank you. So the first story I'd like to tell you is Jill. I was director of a culturally deaf program, meaning all deaf people, all signed American Sign Language. They did not use their voice. And then I met Jill, who was an adolescent, hard of hearing. And she and I would meet every week for psychotherapy, and she would keep telling me that nobody understands me. Nobody understands me. You don't understand me. And I privately said to myself, you know, what adolescent does feel understood, or what adult for that matter. So I didn't really give her much sort of validation, unfortunately. And then one day, my agency, again, for culturally deaf people, was giving a workshop, and we sent out flyers for the workshop. And I get a telephone call from the director of a hard of hearing agency in Boston. Mike, it's good to talk to you. I just got your flyer for the workshop. Good to talk to you, Kevin. So this workshop is going to be accessible for deaf and hard of hearing people, right? Right, Kevin. I had a funny feeling inside of me. Something was not going to go right, but we continued. Oh, that's good, because it has to be accessible for hard of hearing people, which means, of course, that you will have assistive listening devices, right? Right, Kevin. And I hung up, and I asked the hard of hearing coworker what an assisted listening device is. And then I met with Jill again, and I heard for the umpteenth time how nobody, including me, understood her unique needs as a hard of hearing individual, but this time I got it. So I asked her to stand up and outstretch her arms and make one side the deaf world and the other side the hearing world. And for the first time, she stood up, went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. She said, I have a hearing loss like the deaf people, and I feel outside in a hearing world, but I don't like sign, I like speech. And then she goes to the hearing side of the room. But, you know, when I'm in dark, noisy environments, I feel left out. And she swayed back and forth and began to cry. And she told me, in her words, how she felt stuck between two worlds, the deaf and hearing world. And this experience over 40 years ago was my first lesson from a hard of hearing 16-year-old about hard of hearing identity. And Holly Elliott was a hard of hearing social worker. Hearing people often think I'm hearing because my speech is good. Deaf people often think I'm hearing because my signs are bad. We are caught between incomprehensible speech on the one hand and incomprehensible signs on the other. If only those hearers would talk more clearly. If only those deafies would sign more slowly. So some of you are probably wondering why I'm showing you a picture of a monkey. I don't know much about how to catch monkeys, but I heard the following story. You take a coconut and make a hole in it, just large enough that a monkey can squeeze its hand in. Next, you tie the coconut down and you put a piece of candy inside. The monkey smells the candy, puts its hand into the coconut, grabs the candy, and finds that the hole is too small for its fist to get out. The last thing the monkey would do is consider to let go of the candy. Often they only let go when they fall asleep or become unconscious because of exhaustion. Ultimately, the monkey's unwillingness to let go of its attachment to the candy is the cause of its suffering. So what the heck does this to do with the process of becoming a hard of hearing individual? Well, it's a journey, isn't it? Joseph Campbell was a mythologist who talked about what he called the hero's journey. And Jill said it best. Even though I was no longer a hearing person, It took me years to fully identify as hard of hearing. In other words, it took her a long time to let go of the quote candy, unquote, right? It took her a long time to let go and to fully identify as a hard of hearing person. So now we've gone from monkeys to paramecium and frogs. You know, many of us who remember our biology class in high school know that a paramecium eventually turns into a frog, right? The interesting thing, though, is there has to be a time when the paramecium is no longer a paramecium, but not yet a frog. There has to be at least a millisecond of that time. Similarly, no longer hearing, but not yet hard of hearing. There's this journey that happens that you two all know too well. And I look forward to hearing more stories from you later. This is one of my favorite quotes from my grandfather. The trouble with time is that it takes too long. It's one of my favorite. I suspect some of you may agree. So gradually, Jill was able to both accept and lament her hearing loss. And this is really important, so I want to belabor the point. I'm both grateful for my hearing loss, for the opportunities that it has given me. I met some wonderful people. Yet, if there were a medical cure, I'd accept it in a heartbeat. I've accepted my loss, and I still grieve. How can this be possible? You know, it has to be one or the other, right? Wrong. It can be both at the same time. There's some psychiatrist, George Valiant, did a study of the psychological development of adults ages 40 through 80, which is kind of cool because most of all that developmental research is of kids. And he came up with a sentence that is terribly important. Wisdom is the ability to hold a paradox, is to feel both grateful and grieving of something at the same time. So if we were in a room, it'd be easier to do this, but how many of you see two faces looking at each other? How many of you see a vase? Neither view is wrong, right? This is a very famous illusion called the Rubin vase. And it's been used as an illustration to illustrate a social psychology concept called integrative complexity, that there is more than one way to look at an issue and all are legitimate. I can grieve and accept at the same time. As one person put it, I am grateful for what I also grieve. This one has personal meaning for me. Last week was a very, very difficult week for me because I thankfully, I still do have a condo in Naples, Florida. And as all of you, I'm sure, know, Naples and many other places around it got destroyed. And I saw this on Facebook the following day. Thankfully, by the way, my condo is fine. I don't know how or why, but I'm not going to question it. It's possible to be thankful and heartbroken at the same time. It's one of my favorite quotes. Grief is like an ocean. It comes in waves, ebbing and flowing. Sometimes the water is calm, and sometimes it is overwhelming. All we can do is learn to swim. It's a lovely quote, isn't it? It does a much better job than the stages of grieving and validating the life journey that we have in terms of grieving losses. So, who am I? Well, we're a bunch of things, aren't we, right? We're a son, father, long list. Long list. We have multiple identities. It's one of my favorite cartoons. when I gave this talk before, a couple of people said, what about those of us with cochlear implants? What are our identities? And I will share a few interesting quotes with you. And again, I would love to hear some of your stories too. Deb Hagner, who many of you may know, she's an HLAA, talked about her being mechanically deaf, as she put it, because when she takes her implant out, she's deaf, right? Another person said, having a cochlear implant creates those robotic sounds and whirling noises that my brain is struggling to make sense out of, and will take lots of time to do so, but there is sound. I will always be deaf at the end of the day if a battery dies, when I shower, etc. And I'm keeping up with my sign language as well, but this is huge. This quote is from a Facebook group, Hearing Loss Community Group, HLC. And it is a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful group. If I suspect many of you, if not all of you, are on it or know about it, but check it out. It's great. Another person writes, I had what is sometimes referred to as a rock star outcome. I had 99% speech recognition in my left ear the minute I was activated. But you will read posts from folks who say they had to work at rehab, some quite hard. After being profoundly hearing impaired for 2 decades, what I say about my cochlear implants is, I got my life back. So, isn't it true that there is some identity with having a CI, right? I think, I forgot who said it before my talk, but the CI group is meeting. And when I heard that, I'm reminded of when I took my 2 daughters to Florida. They were about adolescents, I guess. And my wife and I were talking to 2 peers our age, maybe 65 or 70 years old. And I heard one daughter whisper to the other, it's good that they're with their own kind. And, we have a need, don't we, to be with people who can relate to our own experiences, whether hard of hearing, with a CI, without a CI, etc. How could somebody steal my identity when I still haven't figured out who I am? So, a real important question that I found helpful was asking a person what they would like to be called. We all have our unique right, I guess is the word, to be called the way we want to be called. This came from the HLC group. I'm curious as to why some people don't like the term hearing impaired. I prefer it to hard of hearing, as I don't feel that gets the point across effectively. Here's the response. You should call yourself what you want and ignore anyone who says differently. It isn't their business. Just respect what others prefer for themselves. I myself use hard of hearing or deaf, but if you prefer hearing impaired, I would 100% respect that. All right? We all have a right to be called what we want. Some adolescents want to be called a pre-adult. So another aspect of identity is what is called spread. How much a person views his disability or her disability is determining not some aspects, but all aspects of one's identity. So, am I one big blob of hearing loss, or am I a bunch of things, including being hearing loss, having hearing loss? So if we were in a group, I'd ask all of you what you notice about this picture from a 5-year-old kid who had hearing loss. Many of you would say you notice how big his ears are. So this is an example of high spread. Another example from a 55-year-old kid. Because of my hearing loss, there's no way I'm going to make it in this hearing world. So these are two examples of a high degree of spread. Low degree of spread. I've learned ways to cope with my hearing loss in order to be successful. Al Pimentel, who is the director of National Association of the Deaf, has had a wonderful quote: "The only thing deaf people cannot do is hear." Another woman writes, "Being hard of hearing is an integral part of my character, but I am much more than that." So again, how much space does hearing loss take up? Gabriella Frank, is a well-known composer, has won many, many awards, born with a significant hearing loss. When I'm really under a deadline, I take off my hearing aids and stay in silence for a few days. In the absence of sound, my imagination goes to different places. It's a bit like being in a dream when unusual and often impossible events come together, the perfect place from which to compose. That's a fascinating quote because it speaks to the advantages she has found for her creativity in taking off her hearing aid and not hearing sound at all. So again, it expands the definition of hearing loss, not just as a disability, but at times an asset. So for those of you who like visual representations of this, it's almost like if you hold the hearing loss right to your face, that's all you are. All you see is this. All you see is one big paper with hearing loss on it. But suppose you hold that paper far away. Well, you see the hearing loss, but you also see a bunch of other stuff, right? You'll see the flowers. It's one of my favorite stories. Paul Smith told me the story, a patient who has given me permission to tell his story to you. And Paul was a middle-aged man who had a very successful sales practice. He was a group leader with salespeople until he became significantly hearing impaired and could not understand anybody in the group. He showed up at my office very depressed, frankly, having suicidal thoughts. But the only thing he wanted to talk about during that first meeting was how angry and helpless, how enraged, terrified he felt when he's stuck in traffic. Now, folks, what the heck does this have to do with hearing loss? Well, those of you who said, well, it may have to do with the fact that he's stuck in traffic and cannot move with the feelings he has in group situations when he's stuck, and no matter how hard he tries, cannot understand people's communication around him. And if you said that, you'd be right. That's exactly what it has to do with psychology of hearing loss. So Paul and I discussed that the whole session, almost like we were discussing his hearing loss without really discussing it yet. He wasn't ready to. And one day, and he told me that everything was becoming too difficult. Seemingly a lifetime ago, he was always on the go and meeting new people. He was a poster child for extroversion, but all too insidiously, his joie de vivre became subjugated by a dread of leaving the solitude of his home. He was very, very depressed and very lonely. So I asked Paul to take 7 cups, empty cups, and label each cup with what I call a core value. Core values can be anything, any of these and more. Okay? And then I gave him some beans and asked him to put a certain number of beans into his core values cups. Let me show you what he did. So Paul put 5 beans in his social cup, 3 beans in family, 4 beans in sales, and he valued parties more than anything else, that he put 6 beans in that. Okay, that's clear. And then we met for a while, and he kind of told me that he had taken up photography. In fact, he had won several competitions. He had thousands of photos from his new camera. And I asked Paul if he would not mind bringing in one photo that he took that depicted how he felt as a deafened person. And he brought me this photo. This photo is among my most prized possessions. It's hanging right in my office. I look at it and I think of Paul. This is how Paul felt as a deafened person. So what do you see in this picture? Some people see fog. Some people see a tree all by itself, a long road. And this is what he named the photo, Lost in the Fog. It's an amazing photo. And one day, Paul and I were meeting, and I had to admit, my mind was elsewhere. And he said, Mike, where are you? I don't think you're really listening to me. And I told Paul of a fantasy that I was having. My fantasy was that the reality is I was about to give a keynote speech in Rochester, actually, interestingly enough, for the Association of Late Deafened Adults, ALDA. And my fantasy was that when I began my speech, I would have this photo on the screen. Paul would be in the audience, and then Paul and I would present our work together. And that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what happened. It was the first time that Paul met anybody else with a hearing loss. So I sometimes kid him, gee, Paul, can I Photoshop your photo by adding more trees to it? He said, Mike, don't you dare. He's no longer lost in the fog. So I asked him if he had changed his core values cups. This was before. Some of you can maybe guess what he did. So he took 2 beans out of his social cup. He added 2 beans to his family cup to 5. Sales stayed the same. He crossed out parties, and he put 6 beans in his photography cup. Kind of a cool illustration. So one's identity is fluid. It doesn't have to stay the same. And frankly, it shouldn't stay the same. And one definition of identity is how many beans you put in each of your cups, right? Now, I'm a psychologist, as you know from the introduction. I am not a financial advisor, but those of us who have financial advisors, they talk a lot about, don't they, about diversify your stock portfolio. Well, I can't give you that advice, yes and no, but I can give you this advice. Because if we diversify our identity portfolio, we become more resilient to changes in our environment. So sometimes our identity is catalyzed by adversity. And this is a quote by Allison Freeman, who many of you may have read it. It came out in Hearing Life a year or so ago. We were walking through a park when a small group of friendly-looking guys started following us. One guy approached me and asked me something, while another guy approached my best friend. I, being friendly, nodded affirmatively to something I did not understand. He then grabbed my hand and attempted to drag me to some nearby bushes. The guys took off, but I got scared enough where I had to examine how my denial put me in a dangerous situation. This sparked the beginning of the process of accepting my hearing loss. What a wonderful quote, huh? And, you know, many of you have seen this documentary in terms of describing some trials and tribulations of hearing loss, namely how you have to guess at what people are saying. This is a cartoon that illustrates the same phenomenon. And, you know, as I've been told by people with hearing loss, part of that, yes, defines their identity. It defines a common experience. But the other thing I like to talk about is what I call ordinary evil. Ordinary evil is that which feels evil to the person, but isn't evil enough to make the news because it happens so darn much. And I'll give you some examples of that. Alan Sussman was a deaf professor at Gallaudet University. He is a rare person with hearing loss who was not as a child been ostracized, ridiculed, and denigrated by non-disabled children. Such memories are painfully poignant. From the HLC group, we had a team meeting at work today with 7 people I couldn't hear. They all know that I'm partially deaf, but somehow I ended up being the butt of a joke. And because I couldn't hear them, they thought it was even funnier. So embarrassed and hating my life right now. One response, I had this all my adult life. Hearing loss seems to be the one disability where taking the mick is deemed acceptable. One of my old bosses referred to me as old trumpet ears, and she was the disability awareness officer. You couldn't make this up. Marlene is shaking her head. Yeah, you could not make this up. So one important task of developing, in my view, an identity as a hard of hearing person is coping with what's called oddism, which is the pejorative notion that hearing persons are superior. It was coined by a deaf man, Tom Humphreys, and popularized by Harold Lane. Oddism. Oddism is society's discrimination and oppression of hearing impaired, hard of hearing people. And what do you do with this? Okay, we're in an oddist society, A-U-D-I-S-T society. We're going to encounter ordinary evil. We need to do what's called anticipatory coping. So let me read you a quote by Janie Ward about how African-American Black people deal with or use anticipatory coping. This book, she interviewed many Black children about how they were helped by their parents to be resilient in the face of oppression. As Gina, a 15-year-old girl from Randolph, put it, I've been warned that racism still exists, that even though segregation is gone, racism is still here. So sometimes there have been things said or done that I did not realize were racist, and I went back and told my parents. And we went over whatever I had experienced. And they pointed out to me where racism could have been the issue. Like I've said, I've been warned. And because I've been prepared for it, it doesn't bother me as much as I know people are going to be people. Racism has existed for many years. I don't want to say I accept it, but I don't have the hostility I might have had if I hadn't been taught about it before. So you know the expression forewarned is forearmed, right? Many of you, if I were lecturing in Boston, all of you would know who this person was. A Celtics player, Boston Celtics player, Bill Russell, who wrote in his autobiography his experience of growing up in a white neighborhood in Philadelphia. And he wrote that when he was 5 years old, he would be outside practicing basketball. His mother said to him, "Bill, just know that some people might walk by you, white people might walk by you and say not nice things to you. Just remember, their words mean more about them than about you." Forewarned is forearmed. So, you know, there's acts of ordinary evil, and there's also acts of kindness that define us, right? Today, I had to go to my ENT appointment. The tech there was so nice. I told her that I had to take my hearing aids out for the x-ray. So when she spoke to me, she tapped my shoulder, spoke louder, and asked if I heard her. I wanted to cry. It was so nice. So we all have stories, and we all have stories which define ourselves. It's called we story our experience. The story makes us who we are. Let's talk about this in a little bit of detail. It's kind of cool. So stories are composed of what's called two landscapes. One is the landscape of action. You know, bunch of events, things happen. Event, 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 right? The other is the landscape of identity, what meaning the person attributes to an event. What does each event indicate about my identity? For example, I was in a meeting and felt frustrated because I could not understand people. That's action. That's the landscape of action. What does this illustrate about this person's identity? You value information in connection with people, right? It's much more difficult now with my hearing loss, but I persevere. What does this indicate about his identity? I'm not a quitter. I became a member of HLAA. It's important to me that I connect with people on a deeper level since they understand my experience as a hard of hearing person. So if you want a fun exercise to do with yourselves or with the group, you know, I've decided to fill in the blank, landscape of action, landscape of identity. What does that say about what you value and cherish in your life, about your identity? It's a fun thing to do. Another fun thing to do is to wonder out loud what qualities about me might other people value and cherish about me that I don't see. So I'll tell you a fun story. So this guy named Joe meets a guy named Harry at a party. And they developed what is now called the Johari Window. And the Johari Window is 4 squares. What I know about me, yes or no. What others know about me, yes or no. So for example, in my case, what I know about me and what others know about me, I'm a male. Okay. What I don't know about me, but what others may know about me is sometimes my shirt is untucked. My mother will tell you that if you want to call her. Michael, tuck in your shirt, she always used to say. What I know about me, but what other people don't know about me is my first dog was named Heidi. And this is the fun square, right? What other people do not know about me and what I do not know about me. This is Johari Window. So let's go back to Jill, who I introduced you to at the beginning of my talk. What other people know about me and I would know about me, I'm hard of hearing. What other people don't know about me and I know about me is maybe that I'm loyal and honest. What other people don't know about me is sometimes I feel like an imposter. And this is the to be announced. Now, let me say a few words about this. There's bad news and good news. First, the bad news. It doesn't feel good to think that we are imposters. The good news is it's a almost universal, at least a very, very common belief called the imposter syndrome. Brene Brown is a woman who studied this. Shame is the belief that there is something about me that if other people see, it will mean that I'm unworthy of connection. In her words, we all have it. It's universal. That's sort of a side note. So I'm going to soon end my talk. My kids would say, Dad, you are capable of babbling nonstop for days and days and days. I'm not going to put you through that, but I would very, very much like some questions, some stories, some reactions. And I think what I'd like to do is, I think I'll read this to you, then I'll shut up and ask for some discussion. So this is from the same group. Almost everything I have done in my life has helped prepare me for the challenges of hearing loss. Being a woman, we are used to working twice as hard as men to succeed in what is still a man's world in many ways. My career involved creating marketing plans for clients. With hearing loss, I apply the same approach. Assess the situation, identify challenges, develop hearing strategies to work around challenges, review results, and think about how to do better the next time. I have always learned to do the best job you need. To do the best job you need the best tools. With hearing loss, you need the best technology. One of the first things I realized 2 years ago is I may have hearing loss, but I am still the same person. Finally, she writes, an added bonus is the wonderful friends with hearing loss I have met who have enriched my world, taught me to wear my hearing aids proudly, and made me more empathic and appreciative of what's really important in life. These are two of my books that you heard about. Okay, I'm finally going to stop talking and listen and hear some questions, some discussion, some comments. You can put them in. I think you're live, so I'm not sure how we're going to do this, but anyway, I'm ready. I'm ready, willing, and excited to hear from you.
Ask him to turn off.
Can you turn off the screen sharing, please?
I certainly can.
We do have people that joined us remotely, and we have a crowd of people here. If there's anybody here that would like to ask a question, please raise your hand and come up to the front. I don't see anybody in the audience here. Anybody remotely have a question?
I think Regina has
got your question. Can you show the slides with your book again?
Yeah, let me screen share. By the way, I want to anybody, in fact, wait a minute. I'm going to type my email in the chat box. And I'll say it out loud for those of you who are live. And I'd be very happy to share with you my PowerPoint slides. My email is mharvey2000@comcast.net. Again, mharvey2000@comcast.net. I did show my mother this book, Listen with the Heart, and I was sort of nervous. I asked her, gee, Mom, what'd you think? And she looks up at me and says, Mike, there's a grammatical error on page 11. So if you read this book, try to avoid page 11 because there's a grammatical error on it. Okay, I think Regine has a question. Her hand's up. I think you probably need to unmute yourself, though.
Okay. You know, I've had a hearing loss for 22 years. I had meningitis, and I lost my balance, a lot of my balance and my hearing loss. And until about a month ago, I'm 80 years old, so this took me a long time to have happen. I've stopped making excuses about my hearing loss or complaining about my hearing loss and my balance and my migraines. A couple of months ago, I met a girl and she gave me this idea. Maybe Sue Miller gave me this idea a long time ago because I'm from California and she told me to join this group. But I feel so much peace and just joy that I don't need to make an excuse or complain about the things because I have so much to be happy about. I have a wonderful life with a great family and friends. And so I think this is something we all need to finally reach. I just wish I'd reach it at a younger age.
Don't we all? Again, my grandfather's saying, the trouble with time is it takes too long. And by the way, thank you for the story because it illustrates something else. When we humans are dealing with grief and depression or whatever that we're dealing with, and we finally achieve this sense of peace, there's a grieving reaction that always, I don't know, but almost always happens. And you just said it beautifully. Why the hell did it take me so long? And, you know, it's a clinical fact when depressed people go out of their depression, the suicide rate is higher then because the person grieves lost time. So wonderful, wonderful, instructive story. Thank you so much. Other stories, other comments, other questions, please. It's a little bit more difficult remotely, but I'd be grateful for it. Yeah.
Yeah, Michael, I go around a lot to libraries and so forth with a couple other of the guys, and we make presentations to small groups about HLAA. And we run into a lot of people that definitely have a problem, maybe moderate hearing loss. If they're with their spouses, we often hear about that through their spouses, but it's very hard to get people to actually take action to do anything about it. Even after some people get hearing aids, they aren't interested in doing anything further than what they've done with the audiologist to make their life easier. You got any thoughts about how to encourage people to get more involved with their hearing loss and acknowledge it and actually make life easier for themselves?
I'm tempted to say, I don't know. Next question, please. Because you're asking the question that audiologists and psychologists, et cetera, and peers, consumers have struggled with for years. I don't know, but I have a thought. God, I'm going to try to say this concisely. It's one thing to give advice, even if it's good advice. The problem with giving advice sometimes is the person feels belittled or maybe not autonomous enough, not independent enough, and therefore doesn't take the advice and may do the opposite. It's kind of like my mother told me when I was 18, Mike, you should not grow a beard. Well, guess what I did at age 18 and I haven't taken it off yet, right? Instead of giving advice, or actually not instead of, that giving advice timed well is wonderful. In addition, I should say, to giving advice, it may be useful to use what I call the Columbo approach. Columbo was a master at being one down to the person he was trying to convict. He asked questions. So in other words, to this person, these people, hey, would you tell me how it feels to have a hearing loss? Would you tell me how it felt to go to the audiologist or go to the audiologist? Would you tell me what, how it affects your marriage? And the more you can get a person to talk about his or her feelings, thoughts, behavior, something magical can happen in that exchange when we become one down to the person. We make the person the expert of his or her condition, and we ask questions. It's what's sometimes called thickening their narrative. The more a person talks about his or her story, and sometimes the more possibility there is for change. The other thing you could do, I'm just thinking out loud with you, in addition, I'm trying to be a bit more helpful than saying, how the hell do I know? Is I'll never forget when I asked a kid how it felt that his parents were divorcing. Fine, no big deal, fine. But then I made up another kid his age. He was 14, and let me tell you about Bill. Bill's a 14-year-old kid like you. His parents are getting divorced. How do you think he might feel? Oh my God, I couldn't get that kid to shut up. He might feel blah, 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 blah. So part of questioning a person who has hearing loss, how do you think you or I or someone can get somebody else who has hearing loss interested in HLAA? Mind you, you're not talking directly about that person to himself or herself, but you're kind of talking about a third point, a third person. And sometimes that can be a catalyst for change. But, look at, this is, the good news, I think we have 15 or so people at this webinar. The bad news, we don't have 16. And it's always, the question is, how can we get people to come or to be part of a group that's ultimately helpful? But those are two quick thoughts to your very, very important question.
That's a very insightful answer. Very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. I'm not guaranteeing that the next one will be insightful, but I'm here for more, please. Thank you.
Is it my turn? Okay. We had 2 books available by Dr. Harvey. When we knew he was going to be our speaker, we called his publisher and said, may we have just a few books in case if anyone would like to buy one. And so we have just a couple. We have more of these, The Odyssey of the Hearing Loss and Tales of Triumph. And what the publisher said when he read this book, he said it was life-changing, literally life-changing. So we actually ordered a few more of these than we did of this one. But this one also was the first one I was going to order for myself. Listen with the Heart, Relationships and Hearing Loss. And they're normally $20, but they were very kind and gave us a chapter discount. So they're $16. So if you would like to buy any of these, either one of these books, and take them home for your own library, you just let me know, because we have the books here and we can get more if we need them. But I also want to say, I struggled with my hearing loss my whole life when I was growing up, when I was in grade school, high school, and then in college. It was devastating. It was awful. And not until, because I didn't know anyone else who was hard of hearing. And not until I became involved with what was originally SHHH, Self-Help for Hard of Hearing People, that Rocky Stone founded and created and grew, then I met all of these other people, all like you, who also all have a hearing loss. And all of a sudden, it was wonderful to realize that I wasn't alone, that we share what we have. So anyway, and Dr. Harvey, I just loved your talk when I was at the convention. I have to say, hearing him in person, if he had been able to be here in person instead of seeing like a postage size stamp of him up there, he is just a marvelous speaker. He was just great. And I've never heard a room be so quiet as today, when we all must have been reading every single word that you spoke, Dr. Harvey. So who else has a story who can come up here? Eric Matson is coming up. And Regine, it was so good to see you. Regine Castle from California is the one who told us about the demo center that they have in California. And we picked up on it, and Charlie and a few others took off. And that's why we have the demo center, because of Regine Castle. Eric.
Okay, thanks, Sue. As many of you know, I used to work for a major corporation, and I spent about 85% of my time traveling all over the world, working on their factories. And then all of my traveling and the jet noise caught up and bothered my hearing.
Yeah.
And as often is the case, hearing reared its ugly head with balance issues. That's why I use a set of wheels there. And I was feeling very sorry for myself. HR was good. Even though I was desk-bound, they brought in an early version of the speech-to-text equipment. They didn't have the phones back then, but they had a TV screen, and the transcriptionist could type onto it. But after a week, the transcriptionist got hold of HR, and they said, we appreciate the business, but we don't speak French and German and Italian and Portuguese like all these people that call this guy. So we really can't help him. Well, long story short, it dawned on me that I had been blaming everything on my hearing. But in fact, that particular problem had less to do with my hearing than it did with language. And that was kind of an eye-opener. I stopped blaming everything that was an inconvenience on my hearing. And I started putting hearing into perspective. And that made a big difference in my attitudes.
That's a great story. Thank you so much. And, it's so easy to say it in theory, balance. Don't underemphasize or don't overemphasize one's disability, but it's always a challenge to find that balance. Thank you so much. That's a great story. Other people.
Thing to share? Anybody remotely? Don't see any hands going up. All right, I think we can.
Well, let me just.
We do have a. Go ahead. Yep, go ahead. Dr. Harvey, did you say have something?
Yes. Thank you. I just want to say thank you. This has been a pleasure. I agree, it would be nicer if I were there in person as I was in Tampa, but you know, I have to, I have to admit, in all honesty, it's nice to give a lecture in my slippers. And I really appreciate being here, at least remotely, and I would welcome any questions, any comments, any other stories. You have my email address, and thank you so much, and be safe. Thank you.
Okay, I think we got like 3 minutes, and I think Barb wants to take a moment to raffle off the vinaigrette.